Okay, we're back. We're once again live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Watching 100 Movies. I am Christiana Ellis,
And I'm Mike Mateen.
and tonight we're talking spy movies. Find a secure location, make sure you weren't followed, and just in case we have a special quarter with a pin in it that I guess if it scratches you, then you die. So, I guess if you need that for any reason. Um, we decided to talk about spy movies specifically because, well, I guess you want to share your initial suggestion.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy spy movies, first of all, and thrillers that are, spy themed. And obviously, we've
Mm-hmm.
done the James Bonds and the Jason Bournes, which are kind of in that genre, but we
We
wanted to
haven't
go
done
more.
the Bournes. We did Mission Impossibles.
That's right, Mission Impossibles.
Mm-hmm.
I thought we did Bournes for some reason,
Now,
but
although an interesting bit of trivia that I just saw about Spy Game is that apparently Brad Pitt gave up the lead role for the Bourne Identity to be in Spy Game.
that is interesting.
In
So
hindsight, I wonder if he thinks that was the right choice or not. I don't know. Well, we'll see. I guess we'll talk about Spy Game.
so Spy Game has always been a movie that entertained me, because it's in the spy genre, and I think we'll talk a little bit about why it's so entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it just recently came back on Netflix, and so they were advertising it, and I said, "Oh yeah, Spy Game. I'd like to watch that again." And so I needed to create a reason that we could watch Spy Game here, um, and we could have done any number of things. We could have done Tony Scott. We could have done Brad
Mm-hmm.
Pitt, Robert Redford. So
Yep.
we ended up just saying, okay, well, maybe let's use this as an opportunity to watch some of the other more realistic spy movies, which is funny that we chose that because there are definitely aspects of Spy Game that are very realistic, but it is very hyper real.
Yeah, it
Many.
is.
Yeah.
It's a very early 2000s Tony Scott version of real.
Yes. Um, which is okay,
Oh
for
yeah,
me at least. Yeah, I still
it's
enjoy it.
I
But
think what's actually really cool about the four movies we ended up selecting is that they do actually represent um, a spectrum of different sorts of approaches. You know what I mean? Like you've got the ones that like all four of these movies definitely have some degree of Hollywood to them, of course, because you're making a movie, right? This is not a documentary, but some of them are much more, moviefied in terms of their presentation, and some are much more grounded, right?
yeah,
But even still, all four of these movies are more on the grounded side of things than, say, the Mission Impossible movies or the James Bond movies.
right. Which is what we were going for. So
Yeah.
ultimately, it all worked out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that was kind of the impetus for it was, hey, let's watch, to your point, this style of movie that's highly entertaining but feels more like, almost more like the Jack Ryan,
Mm-hmm.
but with a little more not fun but flair. I don't know, it's hard to explain. Like Jack
Yeah.
Ryan's are kind of unique, and that's why we watch those in their
Mm-hmm.
own genre. But this was the same reason you could enjoy those movies. These were movies that we wanted to try for that. And
You know,
I
it you
go ahead.
mentioned Jack Ryan, and I know we're not jumping to this movie right away, but I couldn't help wondering when watching 3 Days of the Condor, what's the timeline there between that movie and the novel that it's based on, obviously, and the invention of Jack Ryan? Just because the lead character in that is a CIA analyst who's mostly a book nerd who gets drawn into
Yeah,
action and espionage.
it's so that was like mid 70s, and
1975, I think, is the 3 Days of the Condor movie, but it's based on a novel. That's 6 Days of the Condor. Apparently, gotta get there faster in the movie, I guess.
yeah, because you can't include everything, so you have
Yeah,
to cut half the days out.
yeah, apparently.
So the first book was 1984, Hunt for Red October. So
Okay.
not significantly different.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it seems entirely likely to me that this might have been an influence of Clancy's then.
Potentially, it's also probably speaks to kind of a greater point at the time is that that was probably a time frame based on where we were in the Cold War
Mm-hmm.
that we were ramping up the amount of bookish agents that we had.
Mm-hmm.
And then the question is, well, if you have all of them, but they're still CIA agents, what happens when they need to actually do spy stuff?
Yeah.
And so it seems like a relevant like plot thing, whether or not they were truly tied to each other or not, which wouldn't surprise me. You know, just again, given the depth of the CIA's non-spy agents at the
Mm-hmm.
time. You know,
Well,
so
that apparently the CIA can pay to have people just reading every book that gets published all over the world, just in case there might be a secret code in one of them or something.
yes, and running analysis, like I mean, this is stuff that Chat GPT could probably do in you know 20 minutes, but analysis, see which countries they were published in, whether that made a difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
But anyway, we're not talking about 3 Days of the Condor yet. We're talking about Spy Game. As you mentioned, it's a directed by Tony Scott. Came out in 2001, starring Robert Redford and Brad Pitt. And I think a lot of espionage stuff happens, but short version is that we discover that during an op, Brad Pitt's character has gotten captured. Um, and in figuring out what to do about it, they bring in Robert Redford's character who trained Brad Pitt's character. And over the course of a single day, they're trying to decide what to do. And when it becomes obvious that the CIA is going to basically let the world think that Brad Pitt's character is dead and not negotiate for his release, Robert Redford steps in and personally does what it takes to rescue him, which is, of course, a catharsis because he had spent much of the early movie in flashbacks telling Brad Pitt about how he would never do that sort of thing because he doesn't care.
right.
So,
But it has a lot of fun elements to it because through the flashbacks, you get the sort of this old dog spy tricks in the new CIA as he's
mm-hmm.
trying to like run espionage on his own people,
Yeah,
to try to make this thing work. And then the flashbacks, the training montages of like what it took to become an actual like spy on the ground in the Middle East, and just the juxtapositioning of those two things. I mean, I still think the movie's a lot of fun.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm not criticizing it. I think that I found the emotional arc that I described the most interesting part. Like, not to say that the action part has anything wrong with it. I just found it like a lot of that is like I've seen that stuff in movies before, but like the character arc kind of spoke to me on this watch. So that's why that's the part I described, because the rest of it is like it's fun spy action, but it's kind of just you know there, so there's gunfire and explosions and stuff.
Yeah. The
Although apparently the early op that goes wrong involved apparently Brad Pitt electrocuting himself on purpose and then pretending to be dead. And I just couldn't help but watch that and think like that was the plan. Okay, that seems like all right.
yeah.
I guess they needed a stretcher to bring out the person they're trying to rescue, though, right?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
they could hide it under the
Mm-hmm.
sheet and all that type of stuff. And it it the thing about this movie, and I give it full credit for this, is that like in the moment, like you buy everything that's happening. To the point it took me a number of times watching this movie before I finally was like, this movie's perfect if it's just self-contained. But what happens the next day? Like he did forge the CIA's director's signature
Yeah.
to release a guy from a Chinese prison.
Uh-huh.
Like somebody's gonna figure that out eventually. Just because they didn't at the day he did it
Yeah.
doesn't mean it's not coming.
Well,
Right?
I'll give the movie this at least, that having actually rescued a guy, having spent his own money to do it, and retiring anyway, might be enough for him to not face criminal charges
Correct. Like
or be
you can
disappeared.
right, you can sort of work your way
Yeah.
back to that. But the
Mm-hmm.
first time you watch the movie, like when you're first in it, like it's just like, yay, he saved his friend and he learned this lesson about how sometimes your action, relationships are bigger than the
Mm-hmm.
job code, and that's cool. And then, the second or third time you watch it, you're like, wait a minute, he did do these things that they're the guy who he's tricking into thinking he didn't do them. He did do all of them. It just
Uh,
happened to be
just
money.
imagine
Yeah.
him submitting an expense report for that $282,000. Robert Redford spends his life savings basically on a bribe that ends up getting Brad Pitt out, which probably is cheaper than what the U.S. government would have had to pay if they had done their mission otherwise. Although I guess they still diverted the helicopter and all of that stuff too.
Yeah.
So it's not. But
He did
yeah.
hijack. He hijacked an entire like a naval unit to
Mm-hmm.
run an op that was an op he made up
Yeah.
and forged the signature to get.
Mm-hmm.
It's
I tell you one thing that actually surprised me about that end sequence, though, is, I mean, I guess we have come to realize that Brad Pitt is very willing to do this, but boy, he looks really badly beat up in that final bit, right? Like he's not pretty in that in that shot. He looks like he's been beaten very badly, and he's all swollen. His lips are bloody, and like big half of his face is like swollen up, and yeah.
yep.
No. Although this was 2001, which is I think post 12 Monkeys, so he was definitely, I guess post what? When was Fight Club? That was 1999, right?
Uh, yeah,
Yeah.
mid to
So
late. Yeah.
he was well into his willing to look messed up phase by this point.
Yes.
um, but yeah, so like let's talk. Do we want to talk about another one of the sequences in this that I kind of really liked, and I mentioned this in a message to you, is that there's a little bit of a dollop of Reservoir Dogs in here, because I felt like the training montage with Robert Redford training him to be a spy made me think of the Reservoir Dogs sequence where Tim Roth is learning how to be undercover.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's whole sequence is pretty fun, right? It's got a great
Mm-hmm.
cadence.
Yeah.
It's, like even just the opening of it where he just kind of challenges him and says like, hey, go find out whatever I forget what he's supposed to find out, the girl's name and phone
Well, there
number.
was a couple of them. I was thinking of the one where it's kind of like, do you know anybody who lives in this building? Well, I want to see you like standing on one of the balconies in 5 minutes or something like
Yeah.
that.
Well, I'm just saying the way it opens is with him. He has to go approach and get some information
Mm-hmm.
from a girl, right?
Right.
And so he goes up there and he talks to her or whatever, and then comes back
Mm-hmm.
and Robert Redford, like he's successful, but Robert Redford immediately points out like, well, what did you give her,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
Like, well, you asked for her phone number and all that, and you said this. He's like, so you told her that you're single, you're straight, you're this,
Mm-hmm.
like all the things that she could take from him that
Well, and
get
all
not
those things have to stay true, right? Like,
right.
because
And so
any
he's
detail you give is going to have to always be part of your story, and you're going to have to remember all of those things.
right. He's like, so within all of that, you told her 5 lies that now have to become true, and just the like deadpan of it, which it's so great for like what you're talking about, the character arc, because like Robert Redford is so disassociated with this at this
Mm-hmm.
point that he's like just so methodical about like, well, yeah, you accomplished it, but here's all the reasons why you didn't. Bang, 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 bang,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like coaching or anything, just like you did this, but you did this,
Right.
right? And then, but yes, there's the fun one where he says, you know anybody in that building? I want to see you in the balcony. And and Brad Pitt, like, now he's a little bit more seasoned at it, and he can
Mm-hmm.
kind of get through with a little more deception, and he, you know, gets the guy to like let him out on the balcony, invite him in for tea and stuff like that, and he
Mm-hmm.
kind of
Mm-hmm.
cheers the tea at Robert Redford. That part's pretty fun. So
Yeah. And then, of course, like, we start to see the seeds planted of the conflict that will eventually separate them before the capture that opens the movie is largely centered around the idea that Robert Redford's character really insists that if you're going to do this job, you really cannot care about any of these people that you're working with. When you make a contact, you're not your friend, they're an asset, and you need to think of them as an asset that either helps you or hurts you, and don't you can't allow yourself to care about them beyond that, because they might be using you or using your caring about them as a way to get something from you, and just feeling very mercenary about that, and that rubs Brad Pitt's character the wrong way. Although it's interesting because when we initially see Brad Pitt getting recruited, he seems very much along the lines of, "Sure, you want me to shoot that guy? All right." Like, I mean, it just seems like, well, whatever you say. But then it's the girl that he ends up, kind of feeling something for. And at the same time that Robert Redford is right that she's kind of using him, it's that idea that you can't ever trust anybody, even Robert Redford and Brad Pitt trusting each other, right? That's central to Robert Redford's character's worldview, except that it is nicely paired with how once Brad Pitt is no longer useful as an asset to the CIA, that's when Robert Redford can't isn't willing to let him go, and ends up spending his whole life savings and potentially getting himself in a lot of trouble to rescue him. So that's just nicely thematically paired there.
it is nice, and there's great scenes that have dramatic impact at the time of the scene, which is why I think this is such a fun or well-made movie in that respect, that ultimately like also enforce that storyline. Like there's the
Mm-hmm.
whole, you know, the part where Robert Redford is trying to show him how bad she could possibly be, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
he's trying to jade him, and he gets so upset, when he's throwing the chair off of the thing in Berlin. Like that would really, like, he would really just start chucking chairs off buildings. I mean, it's just
Well, I mean, you would certainly not do that without worrying that someone's going to call the police.
right. It works because it's dramatic, and
Mm-hmm.
it gives this inflection point of like Brad Pitt's that mad, and then when Brad Pitt and when then Robert Redford comes to him and says, "Okay, hey, we're done with this. We're off to Argentina," and he's like, "I'm not coming with you." And he's like, "Well, why not?" And he goes, "Because I don't want to end up like you." Like he like, but there's more. Like he sees that like Robert Redford like became like this, right? That
Mm-hmm.
he's not built like this.
Yeah.
He became that way because of all of the things he's seen in the world. And he's like, I don't want to see those things. Like I don't want, like, I see, you see me as a young you, and you're trying to like mold me into you, but I don't want to become you, and it's so tight and so powerful. And then
Mm-hmm.
also like why he wants to, because he's like, yeah, he's the idealist in me from way back when that we didn't touch on really in the movie. We didn't go to Robert Redford's history, but we have enough because he's such a good actor. Like you feel that that's what happened,
Mm-hmm.
right? And he was like, yeah, I used to be that, and he made the decision that I didn't make,
Mm-hmm.
and now I got to help him.
Yeah.
Right now, I can make that decision.
Mm-hmm.
So I love how, like you said, that whole arc is so good
Mm-hmm.
that we compare it with the stylized like fun spycraft stuff. Like it's
Yeah.
just a fun movie. It's a good
Well,
movie.
you mentioned the stylization, so I think it is maybe worth pointing out, just like Tony Scott in 2001 will never just do a simple cut if he can do a snazzy insert shot with a rack zoom and and
Yeah.
a lot of fancy camera movements. A lot of the scene transitions and stuff in this are a little out of control by today's standards.
Yeah. Not quite like Michael Bay, but you know,
I mean,
but
Michael Bay practically gets it from Tony Scott.
well, especially early Michael Bay, like The
Yeah.
Rock. Like The
Mm.
Rock looks like this
Oh,
movie.
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, and then what Michael Bay had was the addition of like, now we can do this and we can throw in a bunch of like crazy computer shit and
Mm.
you know, yeah.
All
Yes.
right. Well, so yeah, I think Spy Game is definitely fun. You know, it has that kind of nice balance, but it's also just like kind of unapologetically what it is, right? Like it's a spy movie with good looking people who do cool spy stuff. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, like it's not trying to make a greater point other
Mm-hmm.
than I think I mean you hit it with the character arc is really like that's if there's any deeper point to this, that's it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That if you become what you expose yourself to every day,
Yeah.
right? And if you're Robert Redford and this is how you expose yourself to, if you this is the people and the lifestyle that you live your whole entire life, you become this way,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it's never too late. You can break out of it, and sometimes it takes a younger you to do it. That's
Mm-hmm.
the deeper message. Like the other part of it is just let's do some fun spy stuff and
Yeah.
let's trick the bureaucrats, and the you
Well,
know
and it's
yeah.
interesting too, just because that sort of perspective on what does it take to be a spy? Can you actually care about anything? You know, what is there? Is there something that you can actually stand on in between jingoism and nihilism? Right? Like that's a problem in that line of work.
Mhm.
But we kind of see that explored in a couple of different ways in some of these other movies. So, do you want to? You ready to move on, or
Yeah,
do you
no, I
have
don't
any?
think we need to do these like huge deep dives into each
Sure.
movie. We're more just like kind of a fun,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
All right. Well, so I think next let's go to Steven Spielberg's Bridge of Spies. This is trying to let's see, the 2015 movie starring Tom Hanks and Mark Rylance. And I think it won one Oscar. I was trying to remember. Was it Mark Rylance won for Best Supporting Actor? I think. I know he was nominated at least, but IMDb is being really slow loading the awards for me right now. Let's see. Uh, it was a nominee for a bunch, but yes, it was Mark Rylance's Best Supporting Actor that was the winner.
Yeah.
But it was nominated for Best Picture, among other things: screenplay, music, sound mixing, uh, among other things. But this movie is the only one of the four that's a true story, right? I believe
Yep.
that's, yeah. And so it's based on the real life story of a lawyer who's played by Tom Hanks, who gets tapped to be the defense for an accused Russian spy. Um, because, here in the United States, we have this whole due process, and sometimes it's in name only, and sometimes it's, like that's part of the story. But then eventually, the, there's a whole big spy exchange, and this one lawyer, by virtue of having made a connection with this guy and showing that he has some capabilities with these sorts of negotiations, when he can kind of be seen as a neutral party in some respects, like he gets drawn in much more deeply than he would have ever thought. And my understanding is, from writing about it, is that there's a little bit of dramatic license, but by and large, this is the story of what really happened.
Yeah, and it was really funny. I mean, you kind of touched on how all these movies kind of have a different style to them.
Mm-hmm.
But when you connected the 3 Days of the Condor earlier to the Jack Ryans, it is amazing how many of these stories like have some similarities to them
Mm-hmm.
too. Because, well, okay, so he's not a book nerd, but he's an insurance lawyer,
Yeah.
right? And then, so you've got kind of that being drawn into the spy world, which is obviously covered in some of the things we talk
Pedantic
about.
about details, right? Like that's where,
Think about
yeah.
details. Yep. Yeah. And then there's the similarity to kind of the spy game, like how this world can corrupt you, but he goes a different direction, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
he's so big on like due process, being a good lawyer, following what's great about America, even if this guy he believes at the beginning was trying to hurt America, he won't let him hurt America by them bastardizing what he believes is right.
Mm-hmm.
Leads him into the world where he ends up befriending the guy
Mm-hmm.
and learning that it's more complex than that,
Yeah.
right?
I
And
I
yeah,
found I really like I liked this movie before, but I found my appreciation for it growing even more on rewatch. And in
yeah,
particular that aspect of it, of the real nuance in the way Tom Hanks's character has his worldview changed in all of this, right? Because on the one hand, he does very strongly believe that the founding principles in the Constitution of the United States are what make America great, and it is important to follow them. But what he also finds is that just about at every turn, all of the people that are supposed to be his allies are the ones that keep wanting to undermine those rules. And he's finding like, am I the only one that actually thinks this stuff is important? Because everyone else seems to think it's an inconvenience. And he's, kind of frustrated in that regard, and he's getting vilified at home. Like people are shooting up their house and stuff. Like, and then when he comes to, even though Mark Rylance's character is a Russian spy, right? It's not ambiguous in that
right.
regard, but at the same time that he is taking this really costly on a personal level stand for the principles that he believes in, um, and making his own life difficult in order to do that, at the same time that he's coming to have a real respect and even a fondness to a degree for this guy who is actively working in opposition to that. And then, of course, he goes over to East Berlin. Where is it? I I know East Germany was the communist side, but wasn't there like a weird flip or something in Berlin?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like West Berlin is the East Germany thing, or something. I don't remember now. It's
No,
something
it's
like that.
the dividing line through Germany like goes through
Right. Well,
Berlin.
so the Berlin Wall, though, is the point. But and so like when he has to go over there and he's on the other side and he discovers how quickly he is essentially abandoned to this danger by the people that are supposed to be handling him. Not abandoned, but certainly thrown into the deep end, I suppose. Um, uh, it's all just kind of he is forced to continue struggling with his own ideals against his own countrymen, um, at the same time that he is also seeing essentially the enemy in this Cold War, right? Like he is seeing what it looks like in East Germany at that time, and it's not pretty, right? And so there's an element of simultaneously recognizing I believe in these principles of the United States, but I'm also seeing all the ways that we are failing our own principles. But I am also seeing what it looks like on the other side. And he has really complicated feelings about all of that. And like the end of the movie where he's watching out the train and it's very deliberately reminiscent of when he's riding the train in Germany, and at the one point where he's on the train and he sees people trying to climb the Berlin Wall and getting shot, to like as they pass by on the train, and then when he's back in America, he's riding a train, and like parts of it are evoking that, right? Like he sees some kids climbing over a backyard fence, and obviously, like they're not getting shot. It's not the same, but I feel like the intent of that scene is not to just say, "Oh, but look how much better America is." It's almost more like the cautionary tale of it.
Right.
And so I don't know, I really liked all that stuff in this viewing.
I agree. I think it was, I mean, without, yeah, getting too much into ties to modern world, but yeah, just the 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 idea that like he's so definitive on like I'm gonna put myself at risk, but yet then as he starts to learn more, opens up, right? Like
Mhm.
he acts set in his ways, but he is still open to learning, and
Mhm.
that is, I mean, it's I mean, Mark Rylance well deserved Academy Award, right? Because you have to be the foil to what Tom Hanks is going through,
Mhm.
right? And you have to be compelling enough of a person to win his like actual friendship
Mhm.
while also establishing that you did do what you are being accused of doing.
Mhm.
And yet when he kind of understands where you're coming from, understands why you did it, and doesn't, no longer looks down on you for that,
Mhm.
and remains your friend, right? Even if he doesn't agree that what you did was what should have been, like it's just it's very complex
Yeah.
emotionally.
It really is. It really is, because it's, I think there's a sort of respect for the willingness to not compromise your own principles, even if those principles are different, right? And like there's that, and then there's also, I think, an admiration for how kind of unflappable he is, right? Like there's the whole running gag of like, "Don't you ever worry?" And it's like, well, would it help?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I mean, I suppose not, right? It's like, you just sort of, there's this recognition that like, well, I mean, I guess to some extent you don't really take a job like this if you're not sort of fully understanding what the potential consequences are,
Right.
right? And so, it's not that you're looking to have it happen, but it's also, you can't be that surprised. And so, and also just once he goes over there, as much as he is kind of seeing the the corruption or the oppression of the state over there on that side, he's also seeing, the people still just trying to get by under that system, and it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, even the scene where the youths steal his coat, right? Like I really kind of love that we are there with Tom Hanks, and that like he is absolutely not happy to be giving up his coat, and yet we kind of don't hate those kids, right? Like on the one, like on at the same time that they're stealing his coat, like it's true. What it means for him is that he's going to be cold for an hour and then he'll be fine, whereas they maybe really need it.
Yep.
And they're very polite about it, right? Like as long as he doesn't like struggle or run away, like they're willing to be nice about it and say, "Look, we're going to take your coat. Please don't struggle, and it doesn't have to be any more unpleasant than necessary." That sort of thing, and it's really interesting for all of that. But then, of course, too, he is not so naive as to be taken in by like the phony family presented to him of of Abel the spy, right? Like
Right.
they have these people, these actors that are set up to try to make him feel so sad that he'll give in more in order to make them happy, but he kind of sees through that. I think he might not have seen through it if not for him taking that first letter to Abel and Abel seeing through it.
Right.
Telling him, it's like, no, this is pretty good, but it's not her. And so him kind of recognizing that up front and probably being prepared to some extent by the U.S. Before he goes over there, that like they're going to show you people that it may not be what it is. And then once it's presented to him as, no, this actually kind of is just a negotiation, almost like an insurance settlement, right? They're going to try to get you to give them what they want with giving you as little as they can. And there's multiple parties involved. And he starts kind of realizing that although the stakes are certainly higher here than in the car accident claim that we hear him discussing at the beginning, he kind of realizes like, oh, this actually is my skill set. Like I do actually know how to do this.
Yeah.
And so he actively defies his own government handlers by who they don't care about this other student that's also being a prisoner. So he actually actively risks undermining the larger deal in order to get out 2 guys instead of 1.
Another theme that carried over from Spy Game.
Yeah. And like even running down to just that very last moment of they don't bring out the second guy right away because they're trying to see, will you go through with it without having seen this other guy first? Because if they can get away with it, then that's what they're going to do. And so,
oh yeah, and that, I mean, which is why it's called Bridge of Spies. But that just the tense moment on that bridge where, there's like this game of chicken that happens.
Yeah.
And who's going to flinch, right? And yeah,
it's like they're not here yet. What does that mean? Well, it means they're trying to psych us out. It's like, and just that such a dramatic image. It's all staged so well. That Spielberg knows how to make a movie. Who knew? And then Tom Hanks, of course, is great. I mean, he's great in so many things, but he is very good in this. And I don't remember. I remember reading something about the decision to give him a cold during the back half of the movie, and to just kind of have him really lean into that. Like, I don't remember if it was like a real detail that the actual character had a cold, but just like leaning into it in the performance is just like, it's a great sort of humanizing detail, but then also it just makes it all the more sort of heartwarming and powerful when he finally gets home and he kind of says hi to his wife and kids, but mostly he's been saying all along, I just want to go home and get to bed. And he just falls asleep on the bed. And it's just
falls asleep. Yeah, it's a great ending.
Yeah. Tom Hanks is so good at making us just really like a character when that's what he's trying to do, because of course in Elvis last year he was doing a different thing. But yeah, Bridge of Spies, good movie. And it has early on in the sequence with Abel, we see some of the the tools of the trade that he's using, and then with the little hollow nickel that has a tiny little microprint message in it, and like all of that sort of stuff. And we see the quarter that I kind of mentioned earlier that has a scratcher pin in it that they give to the pilots.
Yep.
And so just it's funny with some of that stuff, because I actually also just recently rewatched Doctor Strangelove, which also Cold War era, but also has the bit where the pilots are reading through their little survival kit of all the things that they have, like in case you get shot down. It contains 2 pair of nylons, 3 lipsticks.
Yep.
Fella could have a pretty good time in Vegas with all that stuff. Anyway, Bridge of Spies, good movie. Any other thoughts on that one?
No, I think we covered
Hmm?
the kind of the main pieces of it. So,
Okay, cool. So the next on our list here is 3 Days of the Condor, which was exciting for me because A, I hadn't seen it, and B, one of my favorite movies, Out of Sight, explicitly references it, and now having watched it, I 100% get why they would. Um, uh, in Out of Sight, the George Clooney, Jennifer Lopez movie, the bit where the two of them are in the trunk together, pressed up close. And they start talking about movies and specifically talk about 3 Days of the Condor. And then, of course, once we get Robert Redford and Faye Dunaway together, it's like, okay, yeah, no, we see what's going on here. Why that would be a touchstone. So, do you want to talk about this one a little bit?
um, yeah, I mean, so it's a like we talked about, the guy is a CIA operative. The film opens with all the things that we've already discussed. So that's
Mm-hmm.
like just kind of tie in like our previous conversation. You know, he's analyzing all these books and which languages and which countries they've been put into and all that. And what we what I think is probably more important to gather from that part is he's kind of like an eccentric guy. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like he rides his bike to the office. He has like a routine when it's raining. He goes to the same place for lunch. You know, so what
Mm-hmm.
ends up happening is it's raining, so he leaves the building through a back route, which is what he does when it's raining because it cuts down the time that it takes him to get, or cuts out a few blocks
Mm-hmm.
for him to get to the lunch spot or whatever, to ride his bike to the lunch spot. So when he leaves, somebody comes in and murders all of his CIA colleagues. And he is only spared because, number one, he didn't exit out the front where they would have recognized that he was missing,
Yeah.
was not there because of his lunch routine. And then he
Mm-hmm.
returns and comes back and then becomes a target of whatever happened, you know, that got all of his colleagues murdered.
Right.
And this is where we take this movie and then we go into Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, where we start to kind of ramp up the paranoia part
Yeah.
of
Can
espionage
can you
movie.
trust your own people?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because definitely both of those movies heavily get into that aspect of it. I really liked that we spent enough time in that office, learning, meeting his coworkers before they all get shot. So like during that sequence where they're getting attacked, like we know who those people are, at least a handful of them that we kind of already like, and we know that he likes them, and so it does feel personal. It's not just strangers when they get shot.
Right.
Also, that opening sequence definitely establishes his character as a big old nerd.
Yeah.
I mean, played by
I was trying
Robert
to say, like,
Redford in the
I
'70s,
didn't
so
want to call him just a big old nerd. I was like saying he has these eccentricities
yeah,
that are like his character, which is why he's able to survive,
yeah,
why he's able to discover that there's this larger conspiracy within the
hmm,
CIA, because his weird nerdy book thing turns out to be, there's this, you know, oil field plot and all this
hmm,
stuff he's involved in, which is, I mean, it's important, but it's not really like, I mean,
yeah.
that's
It's like
the political part of the oil field CIA conspiracy is not the key point of the
it
film.
might as well be the rabbit's foot from Mission
Right.
Impossible, right? Like it doesn't really matter. The only
They just
thing that
needed a
like
thing that the CIA was willing to kill its own people for,
well,
right?
and specifically
Yeah,
that when he finds out what it really is, he's kind of just like disgusted at how banal it is.
yeah,
It's just kind of like, wait, it's just about oil. I mean, so it's like it's not even like national security in that way or anything. It's just like, although the other guy does at least make a fairly strong like counter argument, not to defend the killing of people, but like just kind of like, I mean, oil is important. It's not like like it does matter.
well, and that's one of the things that the story really taps into is stuff that was really important
Yeah.
in the 70s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so oil, you know, government secrecy, what, you
Mm-hmm.
know, what the government does and doesn't do, covert operations, morality of the
Mm-hmm.
government and morality of covert operations. Like
Yeah.
it's like leaning into like it's like taking conspiracy theories of the time, which may or may not have been conspiracy theories, and kind of leaning this into them. And then
Well, like
the other part that we haven't talked about yet, where like he kidnaps Faye Dunaway to use her as leverage,
mhm,
and then develop a relationship and
yeah.
work together to try to outwit what's going on,
I
right?
will say I like Robert Redford and Faye Dunaway. I'm not sure I ever really completely buy their their relationship. Like it's one thing when it starts warming a little bit, like when he's still like got her totally as a hostage, but he's being maybe a little nicer than he has to if he was a real bad guy, even though he's already done a lot. Like I mean, he basically just barges into her life, takes her hostage, ties her up in her own bathroom, says that you have to sleep lying on top of me with your hands in a weird position so that I can sleep and I'll notice if you move. Like that sort of like it's not like he's doing a lot of stuff that she doesn't deserve there, but at the same time once you start you start seeing her play the this is really scary and I hate this and he's a bad man, but he is pretty hot. Hmm. And
Yeah.
like it's fine, but like that said, I feel like once they like the switch to okay, I'll sleep with you and now I'm on your side comes I don't know. I'm not sure I completely buy that, but whatever. It's fine.
I
Um
agree, which is why I kind of like want to make sure we didn't like leave that part of the plot out
Oh no,
because
no,
it's
you're right. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I like those two actors, so and they have some good chemistry, but at the same time, just the switch flips pretty fast there.
Yeah.
But I thought that there was some really great tactile detail in this movie. Just like all of the tech stuff, like the highest tech that 1975 had to offer, what with his clunky phone tapping machine that he gets, and all of the computers and the analog switches and the I'm going to
Oh,
transfer a call by taking the big old clunky phone receiver and putting it in this special little rubber socket so that other people can hear it, and just the speaker phones and everything, and all that good stuff. And like they have the scene that's the equivalent in 100 other movies of how does this guy keep getting away from us? And then someone who knows says, well, here's the thing. We train him to be a ghost, and he's got all of these special combat skills, and we've trained him for years. And in this one, the guy just goes, he reads a lot of books.
that part's really funny. There's another totally throwaway line early in the movie that I found hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
When he's obsessing over this book stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and he's highlighting all this stuff, and he finally goes to his colleague. He's like, "Hey, man, when's it my turn at the computer?"
Yeah.
It's like the fact that like there's only one computer
Mm-hmm.
and they have
At
to
the
take turns with
CIA
computing.
base.
Yeah,
Yeah.
at the CIA base. And now,
They have to take
this has
turns.
more
Yeah.
computing power than,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so there's a lot of fun stuff with all of that, especially when he goes on the offensive later and he figures out how he's tapping all the phones and rerouting the whole thing where they try to trace him, but it's going through 50 different lines, and it's got this amazing thing where it's literally like a projected microfiche overhead projector of a physical map on a slide that it has little motors to move it around to the right spot when they're trying to trace it. Like it's just ridiculously analog.
so what it made me think of, which I didn't ever actually go and look or see if it happened, was do you remember the movie Sneakers
Yeah.
with Robert Redford?
Hmm.
And there's all the stuff about like routing the calls and they're tracing it, and it's
Yeah.
like, oh, you got to hang up in X number of seconds and all that. It almost felt like that was like a modern like throwback like to that scene in this movie, even though
Mm.
Robert Redford's not the guy like
Yeah.
doing the tech. It felt like it was kind of a callback to that,
Well,
right?
it's funny because Robert Redford has kind of done a lot of this kind of movie because, like, obviously we talked about him already in Spy Game. Like he's also in had like three others that I was going to mention, but Sneakers you just mentioned. Captain America, Winter Soldier. he's the like the head of he's like one of the high ups in Shield, although in that one it turns out he's one of the big Hydra guys, which has secretly infiltrated Shield this whole time and plans to betray everyone, which is kind of funny because of course in 3 Days of the Condor there's this literal bit where he goes, it's like there's another CIA inside the CIA. And it's just like, oh yeah, Hail Hydra. I mean, it's like it's exactly that. It's kind of funny that I can't help but think that that must be a big part of why they cast him for that role in Winter Soldier, is because he was in this.
Well, and even adjacent to this is a movie like All the President's Men, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where he
Oh
plays
yeah,
one of the yeah, because he's uncovering an actual government conspiracy, through sort of reporter spycraft,
yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And throat and all that type of stuff. Like, yeah, I mean, it's um so I think the only other thing, like, or for like I said, there's more to say about this movie, but for me, when we're talking about like the style of these movies, like this is Sidney Pollack, if we
Mm-hmm.
didn't cover that already,
Oh yeah, we didn't, but yeah, go ahead.
and it's the style of this. Like I joked about it at the beginning because it's like, yeah, the plot lends itself to this, but like Sidney Pollack and like just the dial up of like the paranoia and the
Mm-hmm.
tension and the secrecy that ultimately like and the ambiguity of like the morality of all this, like,
Mm-hmm.
and it culminates in the final scene where he comes up and explains everything he knows, and he's got a gun to the guy who is part of this,
Well,
and it just doesn't really, it just kind of, there's no clear resolution of
I
what happened. Yeah.
well, I was really impressed actually with how sort of bleak the ending of this one is, because we're going to talk more about Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy in a minute, but like that one obviously heavily features this whole paranoia of who on your own allies might be working for the enemy, but it does finish with getting the guy.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas this one, technically, the guy who is in charge of the specific scheme he uncovered gets killed. But at the same time, what he discovers from then on is like, well, yeah, but even the people who weren't actually in on it kind of knew about it. And this sort of thing kind of happens all the time. And you can't get this worked up about it every time because it's just going to be all the time, your whole life. So, you need to just relax. And he has been warned by the Max von Sydow character, who I want to talk more about in a second. But he's been warned basically, like, listen, they're going to tell you it's all okay and you can come back to work and it's all fine. And then someday in a couple of weeks, a car's going to pull up next to you and it's going to be someone you know with a big smile. And then they're going to kill you. And it's like, so, you might as well come being a freelance hitman like me.
Yeah.
And so just there's been so many reversals because that last conversation with that guy Higgins is like, Higgins was not in on the scheme that he uncovered. Exactly. Right. He doesn't seem overly concerned about it either. But also he's the guy that out of anyone who is on the inside was the one defending Robert Redford. Like, he's the only one that ever had like actual sort of straight up conversations with him. And yet his position on this is, look, man, you've got to chill. You are making a lot bigger waves here than I think you realize. And it's going to be a problem. You need to just relax. And Robert Redford basically says, nope, I already told the New York Times everything. And Higgins is just like, you dumb son of a bitch, what are you talking about? And the whole finish is so amazing, just with this whole bit of like, how do you know they're even going to print it? you're going to have to go on the run. You don't know if you've even accomplished anything. And Robert Redford is just like, well, I guess I have to hope so. And then he just kind of starts to kind of go disappear into the crowd. And that's the end. So, like, we don't know. Do they print it? Does anything get uncovered? Does he do any, manage anything? We don't know. And it's just this really kind of bleak ending there. But kind of exciting in that regard. And I did want to talk about the Max von Sydow character just a little bit, because what just kind of an amazing creation that character is, because he's basically just sort of a badass freelance wet work guy that literally will work whatever for whichever side is paying him at the moment. And it's kind of like he is the bad guy in charge of hitting the CIA office at the beginning, killing all of Robert Redford's friends, following him around for the whole rest of the time, which, with what we learn, is basically just kind of a professional curiosity. And then later we discover, because Robert Redford has gotten so close to uncovering this big scheme, the CIA guys basically hire him to go kill the guy in charge. So, like, Robert Redford comes to confront the guy responsible for this whole oil scheme, only to have Max von Sydow show up and shoot the guy and say, here, I'll help you get out without, leaving a trace. It's like, wait, you're helping me? What are you talking about? It's like, oh yeah, no, they're paying me to be on this side now, so it's all good.
Right. So it goes back into, like, obviously Max von Sydow's character is a little more extreme than what we were talking about, but just the idea that, like, the more you're in this world, the more your code becomes what this world's code is. And so his code is, whoever's paying me is what I do, and then I don't do anything outside of that. So even though they were paying me to kill you, they now pay me to kill him, so I no longer kill you, right? And it's like there's like a code to that.
Right. And he really tries to sell Robert Redford on it, is basically saying, listen, is I do whatever they pay me for. And Robert Redford says, like, that sounds exhausting. And he's like, no, it's very freeing. I don't have to care. Yeah. I just go where they tell me to go, where the money is. I don't have to invest my emotions in it.
Right. And so you can see this as like almost like a bastardized version of the conversation that Robert Redford has with Brad Pitt, right? Like it's not that far in the skew of things, right? Like,
it actually also neatly ties into David Fincher's new movie, The Killer, which is on Netflix now. Which, if people haven't seen, I'll recommend as a pretty good, stylish spy, crime thriller, action thriller sort of thing. But the main character in that movie has a lot of rules about, like, how you manage to be a freelance hitman like that, which I won't get into further at the moment. But I thought Max von Sydow's character in this movie was great. Also have to give a special shout out to the fight with the mailman in Faye Dunaway's apartment. That was an incredible scene. Real standout work there in terms of a very close quarters fight where they are just wrecking all the furniture in this apartment. And it's such a good action sequence, because this is something that I first kind of had crystallized for me in a video essay about Mad Max Fury Road. But there are so many bad action sequences where people are fighting and it's just kind of like trading punches for a long time, where it's kind of like it goes on for a couple of minutes and they're kind of still just trading punches. Whereas in this one, almost every sort of exchange changes the situation just a little bit. You go after him, but now the gun has been scooted under the chair, so he has to look for another weapon. So he grabs the fireplace poker, and then, it's like all of that sort of back and forth. There's a cool moment where the guy is running over to where one of the guns has been dropped, and Robert Redford yanks the rug out from under his feet. So I thought that sequence was just a real standout great fight.
It was really good, and it you gave more detail that I hadn't thought about, but it reminded me of probably one of my favorite fights in any Bourne movie is I think it's the second one when he's in Germany and he goes into the guy's apartment
Mm-hmm.
and
I
there's
think I
like
know the one you mean.
so he's in the actual guy's apartment. it the tension is there because like it's the guy he's looking for, but he hasn't quite admitted that yet, and like and then there's like this he's sneaking back to get like a knife out of the knife block or whatever, and like the same thing, it's like their weapons are improvised, so it's similar, like when he loses the knife out of the knife block but he's thrown him through the glass
Mm-hmm.
thing, then now he has glass shards, right? And so it's like, yeah, it just it felt, and it was all very close quarters. It was
Yeah.
in this like small Berlin apartment. It very much reminded me of whichever, like again, to the point I don't even remember exactly which Bourne
No,
scene or
that's
what.
definitely two because the second one because I remember the scene you mean, and it's been I probably haven't seen it since the theater, but I definitely know the scene you mean.
Right, but it was memorable enough
Yeah.
that yeah, we both like still clocked it. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's actually another fight that reminded me of it in The Killer, which I only just watched 2 nights ago, Saturday night I think. But in any case, 3 Days of the Condor, pretty good. Um,
yep.
so with that, let us move on to our fourth and final movie for the evening, which is Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which is directed. Hang on. Stars Gary Oldman and a murderer's row of other British actors. There's all stacked cast in this movie. Colin Firth, Benedict Cumberbatch, John Hurt, Toby Jones, Ciarán Hinds, Benedict. Did I say Benedict Cumberbatch?
Yep.
Tom Hardy, looking so skinny that it's like watching a special effect. He looks like skinny Steve Rogers in the first Captain America movie where they use special effects to make Chris Evans look all skinny. It's bizarre. Uh, did that stand out to you as much as it did for me?
No, because I was really familiar with him in Layer Cake, where he was also that size.
Okay.
The yeah, the one of the James Bond. Who was the James Bond?
Daniel Craig.
Daniel Craig. One of Daniel Craig's earlier movies.
Yeah, no, I saw that, although I don't think I was ever. I wasn't aware of Tom Hardy yet at that time, so.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it multiple times since then, and it can.
Mm-hmm.
There's a theme that could get us to rewatch Layer Cake at some point. But Tom Hardy is very skinny
Mm-hmm.
in that movie, and I've seen it many times since
Yeah.
Tom Hardy became who he is. So yeah, no, it didn't stand out to me, but yes, you're right. He was very skinny. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I kind of like him bigger, like the way he is now. You know, it feels weird looking at him skinny now. But in any case, yeah, he's in this too. But it is directed by Thomas Alfredson. It's based on a novel by John le Carre. Is that
All right.
le Carre?
Yep.
It's about hunting for a suspected mole within MI6, the British the secret agent operation. And I think one of the things that it does that I think is very grounded in realism compared to some is just the recognition of like the type of person that Smiley is, George Smiley, right? Like he is an excellent spy, but he is not James Bond, right? He, the impression you get of him is kind of just like a meek middle-aged guy who you suspect would be very good at being immediately forgotten wherever he goes.
Yeah.
And he is extremely observant and thoughtful, but doesn't say very much. And it's kind of just it when you watch him as the spy in this, it feels like I don't know that much about real espionage or whatever, but the verisimilitude feels right for that,
Yeah.
right? Because I think we all sort of intuitively understand that, you know, uh, Robert Redford and Brad Pitt in Spy Game are probably not really very much what like real spies are, right? You know, and that's fine. It's fun to watch them in a movie. It's not bad. There's an element to which Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy feels more authentic and realistic in that way.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, I mean, it also has a little bit of the theme of like the guy who didn't want to be a part of it or
Mm-hmm.
wasn't planning to be part of it brought in because he's retiring.
Yeah.
But he's also been a part of this world for a very long time. Um, the other thing that I think it does really well, obviously, again, it as we talked about with the last movie, ratchets up the paranoia and who to
Mm-hmm.
trust.
Yeah.
It and it, I mean, it's not subtle that it's a chess game, a human
Mm-hmm.
chess
Yeah.
game. You have to be not paying attention to
Well, I
realize
mean, literally, they have cutouts of everybody's faces taped onto
on chess
actual
pieces.
physical chess pieces.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so, but it takes it further. Like, if it's further than just that, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's showing
Mm-hmm.
this is a chess game between how they interact with each other, and it really dives into like what the toll, again back to like how you become if you're in this world,
Mm-hmm.
the toll that takes on them,
Yeah.
right? Like Smiley himself, like he even has like there's scenes in there where like he's experiencing like loneliness, and
Mm-hmm.
because he can't trust anybody, like that's
Yeah.
what's been built into him,
Mm-hmm.
his identity, and so it's really,
Yeah. And like at the same time that the part of the plot reveals that not only does he know that one of his coworkers cheated with his wife, but eventually we discover that that happened explicitly because that guy was the mole, and he knew that if he slept with Smiley's wife, it would make Smiley less able to see through him because his basically alarms would be triggered for other reasons and he wouldn't suspect. And so like discovering that makes that particular betrayal just like even more of a twist of the knife, right? Because it's like it's not even like you slept with my wife for ordinary human reasons, but you did it explicitly to manipulate me. It's a betrayal of both the personal and the professional in a sort of unique little lemon lime twist. Um, but we also get the sense that that would not have happened if his relationship with his wife had been really solid and healthy otherwise.
right, he needed something that he could actually prey on, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there's two people involved in the equation.
Yeah.
So
Um,
yep.
one of the things that I think is interesting in this movie is that we are introduced to George Smiley when John Hurt, who is, Control, he's like the guy who's in charge of MI6. We know that he has set up like this operation where he has sent someone, on a job, um, and we are given to understand, although this is twisted later, that the op has gone terribly wrong and the agent's been killed, right? And so he is kind of retiring to save everybody the embarrassment of having to really, you know, interrogate how wrong that went. But there's a moment where he says he's leaving and George Smiley is coming with me. And then there's this like pan over to George Smiley with an expression of like, I am? Okay. And like he doesn't say anything, but there's this moment of like, you didn't clear that with me first.
Right.
Um, I mean, I guess I'm not going to dispute you, but there it definitely. So we're introduced to him as someone who gets retired against his will, which is an interesting element of it. Um, And there's a kind of a weird little time jump that it's unclear how much time totally passes there. We've got a dog on screen. He's a good boy.
Yeah.
He so it's this sets up the whole thing though, right? Because the idea is that this mission went so bad. Because it was about finding the mole, but also the suggestion is that the mole is how it ended up going so bad. And so it is kind of a matter of either the mole is so good that they just effectively outmaneuvered your attempt to find out who they are, or alternately, there is no mole and you were barking up the wrong tree and got someone killed. Right? Like that's kind of how it's being presented, perceived by others, right? And there's all kind of this jockeying for power. Now that control has left, everyone else kind of wants to be in charge. And so you have some that are saying, you know, like, well, I've got my special source for Project Witchcraft who's given us all this good intelligence. And that's going to get the Americans to start sharing intelligence with us again and the whole thing. But in the meantime, Ricky Tarr, played by Tom Hardy, he has basically his own sort of reasons to believe that there's the mole, that he has bypassed the head of MI6 to say, I think there's a mole. And so now we're bringing in George Smiley, who is now retired and so supposedly would be immune to that influence and can look for the mole. And that's sets up the plot. But you're right, it's the paranoia, because he is trying to figure out whoever the mole is, it must be someone at the top. And right, that's where all of the people at the top in what they call the circus get their code names, and that's where the Tinker Tailor Soldier comes from. It's because each of the suspects has the code name for them.
Right. Yeah, because it comes from like an old school child rhyme or whatever.
Right. Right.
Them, Soldier, I think, is the one they changed. But...
well, there's Tinker Tailor Soldier, and I think he talks about Sailor doesn't work because it sounds too much like Tailor, and then the other person gets named Poor Man, and then they said, I don't think any of these guys are rich man. So I don't actually know the phrase, but that's what the line is.
Yeah, Tinker Tailor Soldier Sailor, Rich Man, Poor Man, Beggar Man, Thief. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But yeah,
Sailor to spy. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's such a good title too. I mean, it's obviously like a classic rhyme, but it definitely has that whole sort of like eeny meeny miny mo sort of rhythm to it, that just makes it kind of fun to say and think about. But it's just this process of him trying to, keep his own investigation under wraps. He's got Benedict Cumberbatch working with him, who's basically being tasked with, you're to go into the offices of your closest coworkers and your bosses and steal stuff from them in a way that could if this all breaks bad, would get you accused of treason. So be careful.
Yep.
But then we, of course, get all of the reversals, because if you've got Tom Hardy's character, Ricky Tarr, also is like, he's putting conditions on some of his information that he wants help getting this woman out who ended up kind of targeted because of the mole. And that's kind of how he knows all of this. And then we discover later, there's a bit where we learn she has already been killed. It's moot. But Smiley, who knows that, promises Tarr anyway in order to get the information. And he doesn't quite lie, but it's certainly a lie of omission.
Right. Again, it's like an ugly version of what we see in Spy Game, right?
Yeah.
Like there's there's so many of these like themes that just like cross over all four of these movies. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it's the tropes of the spy movie, right? It's the
That's why
building
we
blocks
watch
of
them all
these
together.
stories. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so, so that's one example of, other than just the trying to be in detective mode, that's like one of the spy things that Smiley does, is just this ability to like recognize when, I do need this information. I have to be willing sometimes to, cross the line in order to get to what I perceive as a, you know, better end result. And it's the sort of thing where, like, she's already dead, right? So it's not a question of him saying we're gonna, actually, like, nothing can change that at this point,
He's not letting her die.
right? It's more just a matter of like, let's just not give him that bad news yet, and try to make sure he gives us the information we need, and then maybe eventually he can we can discover later that she was killed. But I think the other part that is really kind of thrilling is towards the end when he's setting up that whole sting, and we finally see him like not just be sitting at tables and stuff like that, and actually doing like spy stuff. Like he has a gun. We see that he is inspected this house. He's figured out what the little codes are. He's figured out where the microphone is placed and where you can listen to it from and where it sounds. And he's taken his shoes off and figured out where the creaky boards are so that he can sneak up on the guy with the gun. And you just sort of see like, oh yeah, this meek, mild-mannered guy knows how to do this stuff.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
the one part of this movie that I feel is like, maybe it's in the, I'm sure it's in the book, so I'm sure that's why it's here. But just like the stuff about how like that initial spy like didn't actually die, he actually got brought back, but like told that he had to like keep it a secret that he's actually back, and he's like working at his teacher, and he's like making friends with this other kid. Like all of that stuff just feels a little bit like, I don't know. I that felt like a weird sort of awkwardly add-on subplot just to set up that he does what he does at the very end.
Yeah. I I haven't actually read the book, but like one of my understandings is that like a lot of like there's another overt theme in the book just about like intermale relationships and like
Mm-hmm.
how all these guys like have these different relationships with each other, and like he's sort of a part of how like not like more than just like coworker like
Mm-hmm.
friendly thing, but like kind of the different levels of how these guys interact with each other, and
Yeah.
he fulfills like one part of that, which I don't think was done well in the movie. That's just something I've
Yeah.
heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, like you can see some of the themes playing out there, like the way he sort of like kind of instinctively can't help himself, that he sees this one kid who's kind of an observant loner and just immediately recognizes like, oh, that's the kind of person that we recruit, and starts just, giving him advice that doesn't feel to him at that time manipulative until later when he starts realizing like, oh god, what am I doing? I'm going to turn this poor little kid into someone like me. And he's kind of horrified by that. And
Yeah, and that's meant to be more like that, like father son, like again, same thing in Spy Game, like
mhm.
bring somebody who I recognize myself into, not like
Yeah.
a weird thing. It's not
Well,
meant to be that,
yeah,
right?
so
Like,
there's a whole like perpetuation of generational trauma
yeah,
thing happening there, but it just feels kind of like half of a movie added on to an already complete movie.
yeah, I
Um,
agree.
yeah. And I confess I was really confused at first because some of these guys have similar faces, and I at first wasn't sure it was really supposed to be the same guy from the beginning, and I was like, wait, what? Who is this? Is it the guy? I'm not sure, and I wasn't sure enough until later when they confirm it, and so you know that when I mean I had seen it before, but I just remembered feeling that way when I saw it the first time. Although I
Yeah.
will say, I feel like it almost entirely justifies that whole subplot for the moment where the bird comes down the chimney and is flying around the classroom on fire until he just takes it out with the yardstick. It's just so like intense and badass. It's just this moment of like, what? That's crazy. And it has nothing to do with anything except that it's cool.
True.
I mean, seriously, it's just one of those things like, other than that being a cool moment, it does not serve the rest of the plot in really any way at all.
No, and but I think what they were trying to do was show like how hard it is. Like once you've gotten that, once that stuff is ingrained in you of
Yeah.
like, this is how you respond in these
Mm-hmm.
situations. This is how you treat people.
Yeah.
It's so hard to like unwind that. And
Well,
that's what but it
yeah.
doesn't, like your point, it's so fast in the movie
Mm-hmm.
that like I'm sure in the book, like what he's going through of like, there's probably a whole like part about him doing that and then being like shocked that he still like had that when he didn't want to have that reaction or something
Yeah.
like that.
Well, see,
Like,
what I was actually thinking was slightly the other way, which is to say that most people in an alarming, unexpected situation like that, where something so unusual has happened, a bird, because like the bird, not only just like a bird getting in the classroom or something, but it literally came down the chimney and it's on fire as it's flying around. Like, I remember once when I lived in North Carolina, a bat got into my apartment and it was just flying around the living room, and I just kind of blue screened. Like, I was just like sitting on my couch looking up at it, and I was like, I froze, and I didn't feel like I was scared. It was just like, I literally does not compute. I couldn't process what was happening. And fortunately, I had a friend who was a little bit more bat experienced than me and was able to kind of snap me out of it. And we shepherded it out at the door. But it was just a recognition when that happened that I was just like, yeah, I just froze. And I think probably a lot of people in an alarming situation would have that reaction. And I think in some ways, some of these stories you hear about, like, oh, this terrible thing was happening and all of these people just stood there and watched and didn't help. I think it's because for a lot of people, when something so unexpected is happening like that, that you just don't even know how to process. There's no decision happening there. But in any case, for him, though, there was just not even a moment of that. No, he had his training just kicked in. He just immediately just handled it. But when he did, and everyone else is just stunned, it's just this recognition of how different he is from normal people.
yep,
And
that makes sense.
so, yeah. And so I think in that sense, I think it's an interesting scene, but it, again, just like I said, it kind of feels like half of a different interesting movie stapled onto this movie. That
Yeah.
um but yeah, so in any case, there's a lot going on. But one of the other things that this one does that really none of the others do is that there's the whole paranoia about who's in on it, and the answer in some respects turns out to be a little bit of a Murder on the Orient Express sort of thing, where like everyone was kind of doing it by accident, because it's essentially like the whole thing with in Spy Game of, you think you're getting this good stuff from your asset when really they are using you, like the little things that you think you're feeding them in order to get the good stuff, it's actually really balanced the other way. But the one who kind of really knew what was going on is, and was really putting serious stuff through that whole process. Once he's confronted about it, he really does kind of like he's upset about being caught and all, but he kind of ultimately defends it.
Yeah.
He talks about having like like it's the everything that we're doing has just gotten so ugly, and he's really actually sort of not just amoral, but he has literally been like persuaded to try to help the other side and defends it on those grounds, which I don't think we really saw in any of these other movies. It was always about like money or just, not caring, right?
No, I agree. That was different complexity.
Yeah. Well, and it pairs so much with the story that Smiley tells about meeting the guy who turned out to be Carla, who is like the big spy master on the other side, right? Um,
Guys,
Carla,
I
the
was going to give these dogs some water. They're
okay,
going to be, but I can
okay,
hear you.
sure.
It's going to be right. But
So we have learned all throughout the movie about Carla, which is the code name for the Russian spy master on the other side, and there's a reveal that George Smiley once met him before he was in that position, when it was a case of, here's someone who is of a category that we kind of keep an eye on because he is kind of on the outs politically, but he seems kind of astute, and he's kind of probably going to get executed if he goes back to his home country. So let's see if we can maybe flip him and have him become an asset for us. And so there was kind of an interview to see if any of that would happen. And he has this whole conversation about it. But it becomes that same sort of thing. And he talks about, like, the whole point is establishing how this can happen, which is because this guy who turns out to be the guy they call Carla is just so steadfast and unwavering that he ends up making Smiley talk too much and actually end up revealing some of his own doubts and insecurities about the whole thing. And this idea of all of the things that we have to do on both sides, doesn't it all feel kind of dirty, and doesn't it make you kind of doubt what we're even fighting for and whether our sides are worth it? And like, so, and he kind of recognizes in retrospect, he got me to say all that stuff by just not saying anything. And that's like kind of scary. But at the same time, he's also able to look at that and say, but the fact that he was so intense in that way, we can use that too, because he's a fanatic. And that means that there are going to be times where he won't compromise when really he should, from a practical standpoint. And so the whole balance there of when it is helpful to have firm convictions and when it can be harmful to have firm convictions, even in defending your own side. And that's always going to be part of the spy stuff, but they really get into that. And so that's where, what happens with Colin Firth, who's, ultimately revealed as the mole, and his actual firm convictions and ideals end up kind of being subverted and short-circuited to work against him. They're able to judo flip him because he cares so much. And that's kind of where it's sort of the case study for the opposing point of view that we saw in Spy Game.
Yep.
Yeah. But yeah, so good movie. And my own throat is getting dry. You can't hear me coughing a little bit, but
I mean, did you hear how much water those dogs drank? I don't know if you can.
No, it doesn't come through on the mic, but
yeah, they were. As soon as I set it down, one of them went over there and just started chugging, and then he went downstairs.
Thirsty pups.
Luke,
they were thirsty. So, anything else you want to say about Tinker Tailor, or anything we want to wrap up before we start talking about what our next episode is going to be?
No, I mean, I think we did a good job of like talking about like the interesting, even though these movies aren't meant to have through lines, like there are some just because of the nature of the genre that
Mm-hmm.
were really interesting, that I don't think if we hadn't watched all four of these movies together, that it would have been more difficult to pick up on,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it goes back to, just kind of wrap it all up, like the fun part about Spy Game is that it's taking these nuanced themes that are in the more, like you use the term, the more verisimilitude type
Mm-hmm.
espionage movies, and putting it into this hyper movie, like all the things that happen and the relationships and the characters and how they got to where they are, like those are just hyper real versions of like what we saw in these other three movies. Like it was kind of a fun
Mm-hmm.
exercise when it
Yeah.
really just started as like, I want to watch Spy Game again, right? So
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
so I enjoyed this.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I didn't think I was going to enjoy it,
Yeah.
but almost more than I already thought I was going to enjoy it, because of like relating these things.
Yeah.
So
Well, in some ways, I think our next episode started in kind of a similar way because I had been feeling like what I wanted to watch was a movie called After Hours, which is a Martin Scorsese movie, which I have never seen. And I think, largely speaking, is one of his lesser seen movies. But I feel like in the last couple of years, I just keep encountering more people sort of rediscovering it and really liking it. And so I'd been feeling for a while like it was on my list of a movie that I wanted to watch. But then it occurred to me in thinking about that, gosh, there are a lot of movies that Martin Scorsese has made that I have never seen. And a lot of them, like most of the ones that I have seen are like Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, Goodfellas, Casino, Gangs of New York, like The Departed, and there's a lot of these crime thrillers, right?
yeah.
Crime dramas. And it just feels like he's made a lot of movies that are not like that at all. And it just occurred to me, maybe it would be interesting. We've done episodes in the past that kind of focused on a particular filmmaker. So I thought it might be interesting. What if we picked four Martin Scorsese movies that neither of us have ever seen?
That could be fun.
Yeah. So I made a spreadsheet of these. And so After Hours is the one that kind of inspired it. And it works for our criteria because neither of us have seen it.
And even more fun, if you ask Chat GPT the best lesser known Scorsese films,
Yeah.
After Hours is number one.
Oh, well, there you go. See, it knows. Um,
You might
so,
have heard. I don't know I don't know how any of this stuff works anymore. So
well, I mean, I think it might be picking up on, in some ways, the same kind of thing that I did, which is the more people are talking about it lately in the last couple
that's
of years.
exactly what it's doing.
Yeah.
And that's why it's kind of a fun, like, I don't use this as an end all be all, but
Oh, sure.
I do throw things into it every once in a while just to
Hmm.
be like, see
I
what it's gonna.
so I my take on like the large language models is that they are neat and useful for some things, but there are an awful lot of people who are proposing using them for things that they're entirely inappropriate for. Um, for example, the idea that you can have it write up something that looks very much like a respected journal article, complete with bibliography and citations and everything, except that all of those citations are actually made up and they're not real. And so it is very good at simulating real information, but but being able to depend on it for any of that information, less so. But anyway, so I as far as picking which other movies, because he's made a whole bunch, and including, so I made a list that does not include any of the shorts or any of the music videos, even though he's done a bunch of both. But he has also done a bunch of documentaries and a bunch of dramas and some period pieces and stuff. So what other after so definitely after hours, but what else?
So I've I realized when we started talking about this, I don't remember where this came up. This came up before we started talking about this. I didn't realize what the King of Comedy was actually about,
Oh yeah.
and how it was like kind of a satirical black comedy,
Mm-hmm.
and like not it's definitely not the inspiration for Joker, but
Well,
like it
Joker uses it for inspiration for sure. Draws
yes,
on it.
draws on it. And I
Mm-hmm.
realized I've never actually seen it because I
Mm-hmm.
didn't understand what the deeper meaning of it was. So
Yeah.
I'd kind of like to watch it for context.
Sure, sure. Well, that's another one that I haven't seen either. Like I've kind of seen some clips and I kind of know the vibes enough to sort of recognize that was part of what Joker was doing, but I've not actually watched it myself either. So let's add that to our list here then. Um, so do we want to consider doing one of his documentaries? I mean, there are certainly enough other dramas that we could do all of those if the documentaries aren't as interesting. I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. When you mentioned that to me yesterday, like I was just kind of torn. Like I don't. I mean, I guess I'd be curious, but like, is it gonna
Hmm. I mean, we
be
don't
as?
have to. I'm
I don't know. I don't know.
yeah.
But I'll also preface it with this. Like, so let's go the complete other route.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other movies that was interesting to me that I don't know if I want to watch in this context is The Last Temptation of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Just because, like the controversy and like
Yeah.
the part, like, is that something we really want to get into a discussion about? I'd like to watch it,
Mm-hmm.
but is that really like the vibe we're going? I mean, and so it was. That's like the extreme other
Yeah, no,
example,
I see what you mean is that
right?
like I suspect it's the sort of like if we were to talk about it, my guess is that what was incredibly controversial at the time would probably feel less so today. But that's not to say it's not still a charged subject. Um, and there are lots of others we could choose too. So, like for example, Silence was a 2016 movie with like Adam Driver and is about like Jesuit priests. It's a period piece, for example.
Heard good things about that.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to watch that. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe put that. And so that's three. Do we want to get one more? We've got like The Age of Innocence,
I'm
Kundun.
curious about that one.
Yeah.
It's because that's one of those movies where it's like I don't know that I'll ever watch it
Mm-hmm.
outside of this context.
Yeah.
So maybe that's like a let's put it in there
Yeah.
for the
What?
yeah, for the
Which one?
Age of Innocence.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because we already got Silence, right?
Yep. All right. So, The King of Comedy, After Hours, The Age of Innocence, and Silence. All right. So that's that'll be our next episode. Martin Scorsese's other movies, uh, and so that's what we'll talk about next time. And so in the meantime, everyone, we're heading into holiday season. Lots of movies are coming out. So watch good movies.
Good movies.